Flu is here. It is spring. So I've put a door on my garage to help with keeping the sparrows out. Might notice the hinge is kind of unusual, and that's because we get snow buildup and ice here, so I wanted a door that I could lift up and pivot. But let's talk about this bird flu deal. So, high path avian influenza, bird flu, is popping up all over the country right now. Matter of fact, I just seen a post where it came into a small backyard flock in a county neighboring my home county back in Nebraska. There's 2 cases here in Minnesota. It's in Colorado, it's in South Dakota, it's in Iowa, it's in Missouri, it's in Arkansas. You get the idea. All up and down the East Coast, etc., etc. So, why is it such a big deal? Well, it is what they call high path, which is highly pathogenic avian influenza. So it has a high mortality rate. Typically, migratory waterfowl are what carry it, and from my understanding, they are normally asymptomatic. However, I have been seeing videos this spring where goose hunters are showing birds that are being affected in the wild. Now, another little precautionary measure here, since I'm out doing chores, I'll show you. I have taken to putting a lid on my water as I'm watering. It's very simple. I've got a wooden frame right here. I've got this nailed along here. And then I've got just some little tiny bungee cords, like that. Then I can go ahead and water. I just leave it covered to keep the wild birds out of it as I'm watering. So it's got a high mortality rate, and a lot of it is transferred through the droppings of the infected birds. Incubation period takes a little bit of time. You're not going to see it right away, but when you see it, it's going to hit like a hammer, and your bird's going to be dropping. If that happens and you start noticing your birds are sick, you got to call the state vet. They got to come out. They got to inspect it. If your birds have it, they're going to put your birds down. And then they're going to set up about a 6-mile perimeter around you, stating that everything in that area has to be checked out. And as you know, I've seen people posting, why are they picking on backyard flocks? Well, you have to think of a couple of things. First of all, the big commercial farms, they're already in talks with the state vet regularly, and the state vet ain't gonna waste its time posting on Facebook hoping to catch the eye of someone who has a commercial broiler facility or commercial egg layer facility. So they're already in contact. So the only things you're seeing on Facebook and other social media is designed for the people who are not commercial producers, you and me. Now, they've been shutting down sales and swaps and all this stuff. And I've seen people ask, well, how come, the feed store can get these chicks in, but I can't go to a swap meet and get chicks? Well, basically, the chicks are coming from a secured facility, and those chicks are being transported on trucks. The trucks are disinfected. They're not hauling any birds back from the feed store. It's going one way. And then it's up to you, the buyer, to decide if you're going to take the precautionary measures that you need to take. Now, as I said, this gets passed a lot of times in the droppings of wild birds. So, a lot of this can be avoided by locking up your birds, not letting them free range all over the farmstead by cleaning the tires on your vehicles, cleaning, or even better, wearing a different set of boots around your birds. Essentially, you want to establish a clean zone and a quote-unquote dirty zone. So there needs to be some sort of barrier or system in place to where once you cross this line that you decide on your place, that you have to wear different shoes or disinfect your shoes. If you have to take birds somewhere, I would even go so far as to say don't bring any back. Disinfect the cage they were in if you bring the cage back. Take a shower, wash your clothes. The cleaner you can make it and the more separation you can do between the outside world and your farm, the safer your birds are going to be, bottom line. Now, I can't believe I have to address this, but I do. There's people going around saying this is a big conspiracy, that it's a government ploy to make people not be able to be self-reliant. And it's a move to control the food chain in the country, this, that, and the other. Well, if you've been in chickens basically the length of quarantine, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. You haven't experienced this. This is all new. And you're not sure what to make of it. And, if you're saying this about the bird flu, you're probably saying it about COVID as well. Just been my observation. So here's the reality of it. Bird flu travels with migrating birds every single year. It's just a question of what strain it is every year. Whether it's the high path or the low path. If it's the low path, we don't really worry about it. We don't really hear about it. And if that's the prevailing strain that year, you don't really hear a lot of cases of entire farms being euthanized. But if it's the high path, that's a big cause for concern. And as I've explained to people a couple of times now, they say, well, how is it that these commercial farms with all their biosecurity measures are getting bird flu? Well, biosecurity measures are only as good as your employees, first of all, because I know a lot of these places you're required to tell them if you have poultry or not, and if you do and you want to get hired there, you can't have them anymore. You got to get rid of them. Well, what happens sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, is people say, oh no, I don't have any birds, when they do. Or they're going to tell you, oh, I got rid of them, but they moved them to their buddy's place, and then they go over there every weekend or every night or whatever, So totally missing the point and defeating the purpose. Then you got the feed truck drivers, right? Now, if you're expected to deliver to 3 or 4 different places in the course of a day, and you are supposed to do so in a certain amount of time, the weather's not working right, or your truck's broke down a little bit, you're running behind, whatever the case, you forgot to grab extra pairs of little plastic booties to slip over your boots, whatever the case, you just didn't follow the protocols for that day. Well, now you've tracked it in to the front yard of this commercial facility, and then the guys who work there park their cars They walk through what you tracked and they bring it into the barn. Not saying it's all on the employees. Sometimes there are instances where the ventilation systems do allow sparrows to come in and other small birds which might be carriers. I'm just saying the simplest answer is usually the correct answer. Now, as far as the backyard flocks, why are they closing down these swaps and whatever? Well, as I said on my Facebook page, let's say I'm worried about how things are going in the world and I decided to binge watch a bunch of prepper videos. And I decided I needed chickens. I've never been to a chicken sale before. I don't even know where to get chickens. I'm at the gas station. I see a flyer for a swap meet and I say, that's where I'm going to go get my chickens. Well, it just so happens that since I'm living out in the middle of nowhere, that I've got these wild geese that are hanging out right next to my place. And they're sick. And I don't know it, but they're sick. Well, I don't know nothing about this biosecurity stuff. I think it's all a big government ploy anyway. So I'm just going to load up the kids, go to the swap meet, and I'm going to buy me some chickens. Well, I've been walking around in duck crap all morning. Goose crap, excuse me. And I'm going to go to the swap meet, track it all over. Everybody else is going to walk through it. And then, however many days later it takes to incubate, I think it's up to 14. All of a sudden, there's all these people with outbreak. Well, you can see where that snowballs, because I know the swap meets I go to, you get people from several states. I mean, we're talking Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Illinois, Michigan. So you just, by just not knowing any better, just went to the swap and caused people in multiple other states to track it home and cause outbreaks. So that's what they're trying to prevent. They don't want that to happen. And I realize I'm making it seem like an exaggerated example, but that's how serious this kind of thing is. And, it's one of them deals where there's people that they've spent their whole life working on their breeding program, and they've spent, in some situations they've imported birds from other countries. I mean, stuff that you just can't replace. And they follow all the rules, but then they could still get it from the migratory birds flying over their place, or somebody shows up and they want to buy some stock, and instead of waiting in their car or something, they get out and start walking around the pens before the guy even knows they're there and tells them, hey, you have to wash your boots and all this other stuff. Long story short, there's a really big chance for you to lose everything just on the roll of a dice. So, as much as it sucks that these swaps and shows and sales are getting canceled this spring, it is probably for the best in the long run. And not only that, but you also got to realize this doesn't apply just to the swap meets. I know they're not explicitly calling out for bans on shipping through different states, but if you think about it, if I have bird flu on my farm and it just hasn't surfaced yet, I don't see the symptoms yet, and I ship you a bird in Alabama or Oklahoma or Utah or wherever, and then all of a sudden my birds get sick, well, that bird I sent you might have been sick, and then you're going to lose your stuff too. And then maybe you've been visiting your buddy's place who's got birds, and he could lose his stuff too. So this is one of those situations where hard choices are going to have to be made for people. And I'm not going to be the one to make the choices for you, but, you know, you might have to decide, hey, it's not worth going and buying stuff this year. It's not worth going and selling stuff this year. I might have to hold on to these birds that I was going to sell this spring, so I'm not going to hatch this year. And that's just the situation we're in. Now, in regards to going back kind of to the conspiracies here, people are like, oh, why are, you know, it's awful convenient that it's happening. All this is all going on with Russia. That is coincidental. The fact that Russia decided to go do what they're doing this time of year, it just happens to coincide with the fact that it's migration season. Okay? Or how about, well, it's awful funny how, you know, it's only popping up in the states with all the laying hen houses and the broiler houses and all this. It can happen in any state, but because of how agriculture works, you grow your grain in the best land possible for it, flat, fertile land. In other words, river deltas and old seabeds and ancient riverways, ancient waterways. That's where your best soil is. That's where it's easiest to farm. So, you know, the Midwest, for example. Well, you get all that, and it's places where there's a lot of water, which is the habitat of waterfowl, which migrate. So they're coming up from the south. They're gathering in numbers, which, if you learn from COVID, gathering in numbers helps spread disease. So then you've got all these geese coming together from different places where they wintered. They're spreading the disease to each other. Then they're flying across these states. And every time they land, they're probably landing around some birds that they probably haven't been around yet. And it just keeps spreading and claiming more casualties along the way. But we grow our grain where it makes sense to grow the grain, and then from an economical standpoint, it makes sense to keep your livestock close to the grain so you don't have so much money wrapped up in hauling the feed. So you could grow chickens anywhere, but it makes sense to have them in Iowa, to have them in Nebraska, to have them in Missouri, because that's where your corn is and your other grains that you're going to feed them. So you've got a good chunk of the nation's egg and poultry production, as far as large scale, coinciding with the location of the big waterways in the country, the Midwest, the there's other ones, the East, the Central, etc. But those then coincide with the migratory paths of these waterfowl, which are the disease carriers. And I mean, there's other species that carry them. I know I keep saying waterfowl, but there are other species. So you've got the largest concentration of birds that could potentially carry the disease traveling over the parts of the country that has the largest concentration of domestic poultry production. It's just cause and effect. There's no big scheme behind it. You know, sorry to disappoint those who want to play connect the dots there, but anyway, read up on it, watch the USDA videos, watch the USDA website. They've got a tracker showing all the locations of it, and just really be mindful when you go to the feed store when you go to your friend's place, you know, when you go to the park, things like that, and disinfect regularly. Keep your birds under wire. Don't let them run wherever they choose to. And hopefully, by the time migration's over, if we all do this, it'll subside and we can go back to selling stuff later in the summer and selling stuff this fall. So, I know you didn't see much of the birds in this video, but I just felt that it was better to focus on what I'm saying and not, you know, getting a bunch of comments of, is this bird for sale or is that bird for sale? So that's why I didn't really show much for the birds. Anyway, enjoy your Sunday.